So I'm going to begin this introduction for our next panel, and as I speak, our third panelist will come on in. So we're really excited today to welcome QPI, the Quality Parenting Initiative Minnesota, along with Theresa Day, who is an adoptive parent and is going to come say some words as well. So QPI is a strategy of the Youth Law Center. It's an approach to strengthening foster care, refocusing on excellent parenting for all children in the child welfare system. And it's a movement that's inclusive and focuses on three main areas to create transformation: excellent parenting every day, practices informed by developmental research, and lived experience individuals are equal partners in creating solutions. So we're going to welcome this panel today. We're going to have a 20-minute discussion, and then we'll leave about 5-10 minutes for Q&A. Welcome to Theresa, Mikala, and Shana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mikala, and I am a birth parent. I graduated as a champion through QPI a year ago in June. So I'm just super excited to be here, and I want to thank CASCW for having us here. And I never would have thought I would be up here 5 years ago with what I was going through. So it's truly an honor to be here, and I'm glad to be able to share some of my experiences.
Dosha, everyone. My name is Holy Owl Woman, and my English given name is Shana King. And I'm a birth parent and a Minnesota champion for QPI Minnesota Champions, I guess. and I also am a parent mentor at the Equal Law Center. I'll pass it to you, Theresa.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Theresa Day. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm kind of pinch hitting right now. Was not planning to be up here. Here I am, hanging out with some of my friends. So really excited about this last minute opportunity. So I'm a licensed social worker, graduate doing my clinical right now. I'm an adoptive parent through the Indian Child Welfare Act. I was a tribal worker for many years, including being a case manager and parent advocate in the community prior. And I've done some work with QPI, a few presentations, and so really love the work they do, and I'm excited to talk with everybody today.
So I think one of the most important things that we really want to emphasize here as people with lived experience is the importance of building relationships. And a lot of the times, I grew up in foster care, and then I in turn had my children in foster care as well. And one of the reasons that I am a Minnesota champion for QPI is because if QPI was around when I was a child, I would have had support, and I probably would have a much better relationship with my birth parents. And if that wasn't possible, I probably would still have a connection to my foster family. So I would have places to go for like Christmas and holidays, which is kind of a struggle when you age out of foster care. So for me, I think it's really important that we keep those connections in our life, and that people understand that like, this is people's lives, and the relationships that you guys build are super important to families.
So continuing with this theme of relationships, right? I think we all in this room could agree that permanency for a child should never, ever mean that they lose anybody that loves them or that they love. They should never lose a culture or a community that makes them who they are, because we know the impacts that negatively has on children and families for generations to come, right? We know how important this is. And it can seem like such a big, heavy task, right, when we are so overburdened and overworked in the child welfare system to say, well, how does that look in real time, right? Like, how do we do that? You know, we've got this home, we've got these people that are going to take these kids on permanently. What does that look like, right? And it all comes back to relationships. We have to support families in building meaningful, safe, healthy, supportive relationships with everybody involved in caring for that child for the rest of their life, right? I think about this especially when the placement and the permanency is not a cultural match for that child, right? And that happens, right? We see that. I believe in always placing children with their people, right? That keeping children in their community. But we know that in child welfare oftentimes we see cross-cultural placements, right? And I think what I want every adoptive parent to know that is not a cultural match to the child they're raising is that they cannot be everything for that child, nor should they be. I think we see a lot of adoptive parents that, we hear, well, I love them, but Sandy Whitehawk always says love is not enough, right? And that's true. We have to have the critical thinking and the cultural lens that supports everything that children are. And we have to do hard work with adoptive and guardianship parents to make sure that they understand that it's not about them, right? And we're not saying you're not enough. We're saying that children are complex humans that are made up of so many people and cultural and communities, and they need all of that. And you need to build the relationships. You need to be the conduit that gives them those people. You can't say, oh, well, I'll take them to a powwow every once in a while. You're going to teach your kid that they're only native at a powwow, that they can't be native at home. You're going to teach them that it's a identity they take on and off, right? But it's not. It's exactly who they are. And so you need to recognize as an adoptive parent that you are not going to have the epistemic knowledge, right? Like the ontological knowledge to raise your kid from the cultural perspective, because that's not your culture. You have to connect them to people that can do that every day in the stories they tell them, in the language they use, in the way they talk to them, the way they teach them, the way they discipline them, right? That is all rooted in culture. It's the bottom half of the iceberg, right? And we have to make sure our kids are connected to people that can do that and be that for them. And that is their family. That's their community. So, from the perspective of an adoptive family or guardianship family, that is our duty. And if we're not willing to do that, we shouldn't be adopting. We have to think about the big, huge changes we are willing to make for the kids we love. Thank you.
And she just said that she just jumped in here in a pinch and was unprepared. I think she's really prepared for any kind of thing. But anyways, I think that, for me, as an adult, being a part of the system, I did not have a good relationship with my social worker. And, but I had a wonderful relationship with my tribal representative. And if I didn't have that relationship, which I continue to have to this day, and my case closed in 2011, I wouldn't have my kids. I would not have reunified. And being able to have that amount of support and somebody to listen to and to understand, and just to even make sure that I'm eating and my kids can eat and that we have the clothing that we need is really important. Those concrete supports that family needs, that help build relationships are super, super important. And I always talk about ICWA, and if ICWA was not a part of my case plan, I probably would not be reunified today.
So that brings up a really good point, Shana. So for me, I did have ICWA involved in my case, but what it took for me to really reunify with my kids was, in the beginning, I thought all these people were against me, and I did not cooperate. I did not do any of that. It was my social workers, it was the foster family, it was all these people and these resources coming beside me and truly helping me get to where I need to be so I can bring home my children. And so if it wasn't for forming those relationships and just really speaking out when I needed help, and going to my domestic abuse groups and going to my, I was in treatment because I'm in recovery as well. So it really took me, forming those relationships to bring my kids home. And I still have my two oldest daughters, they were in foster care for 2 years. And, realistically, I shouldn't have gotten my kids back. I went to the trial to, if we go by the law, it's 6 months. But all these people came beside me and worked with me and realized, hey, we just need a little more time because we see this potential in her. And, if it wasn't for those relationships, the judge wouldn't have overruled and give me my kids home after them being out of placement for 2 whole years. So, yeah.
And can you just talk a little bit about the relationship you have with the foster family?
Oh yeah, so that's who I co-parent with. So they're so much involved in my life, and if it wasn't for them not just supporting my kids, they also supported me. They seen me for who I was and not for what I was going through, what brought me into the child welfare system, my kids. And they took the time to welcome me into their home. I was having visits inside of their home, and my kids loved seeing us work together. They like I remember my daughter, she asked the foster mom, like, you love my mom? She's like, yes, I love your mom. And so we all just became one huge family. And, they pick my kids up from school still. And it's what me and my kids needed. And it's truly, like, I wouldn't be here today without those relationships. Like, I'll be starting my internship in August to be in LADC. So those relationships thank you. Those relationships I formed got me to where I needed to be so I could do this work.
And so, Theresa, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Just because I know you personally and we have a lot of conversations, and I'm just going to ask you to be vulnerable and talk a little bit about what it was like to be a foster parent and, the adoption piece of things and how you truly feel about the birth parent.
That is vulnerable, but easy because I think that, I love birth parents, those are the people that brought the children into the world. And culturally speaking, we know children choose their parents, right? And that's a bond that should never be severed. And sometimes, kids end up not being primarily raised by that person, but they are still, whether they only saw them at the hospital or whether they were with them for years before they were removed to a different home, the connection is essential. And I think the child welfare system has a lot of work to do to support birth parents better. Your story brings tears to my eyes. That's beautiful. It should be the norm, not the exception, right? We need to create mechanisms within our system that's the practice we do, right? Not, I can't tell how many times I've heard, oh, we can't tell you where the foster parent lives. Oh, that's confidential information. Like, why do we treat birth parents like criminals, right? When they love their children and they want to be a part of their lives. It's a fear-based practice rooted in our very, very low risk tolerance, right? And the lack of understanding of the constellation of people that need to surround a child. And there's a lot of change that needs to happen in that child welfare practice. And to kind of loop it back to what Shana said earlier about the tribal workers, I was a tribal worker for many years, and sometimes the parents, oftentimes the parents trust us more than their child protection worker, right? So if we want to do true trauma-informed work with parents that involve them throughout the process, help them work their case plan, and if they don't reunify, keep them meaningfully connected in their children's lives and knowing that they have worth and value ongoing, right? We got to use those tribal workers and respect them. And I can't tell you how many times, and my colleagues are in the house, how many times we've been disrespected as tribal workers, right? By the very system that we're trying to advocate for our parents in, right? So I think the relationship among professionals is really important, and the relationship among parents. And so, also to speak to something else that was said about the connection, children have so many meaningful connections, and sometimes that's with foster providers that they were with temporarily before they went home or before they were adopted, right? We keep our son in very close contact with the foster family that he was with for 2 years before coming to our home, because that is an essential primary attachment for him, right? We have to acknowledge all of the attachments that children make and that make them who they are, and that's really important. So I think we have to really take this relationship-based, long-term look at what we mean when we say permanency. And permanency, right, with parents, right, when we reunify, is not supported at all by our child protection system. It's just not, right? Okay, good job, case closed, bye, good luck with your life, right? And it's just, we have to put in more aftercare supports because it is a disservice to families to intervene, tell them everything wrong with them, put them through hell to fix it, and then everybody bounces out of their lives, right? Like, that's unacceptable practice. We have to do more post-permanency support that meaningfully supports the trauma. I mean, the child welfare system is, I don't know if anybody who's a fan of Pauline Boss, who's into the ambiguous loss model, right? So the child welfare system is a community, family, and individual level trauma, right? There is no getting around it. No matter what or who you are, being involved in the child protection system is trauma. And we end that intervention and we traumatize families, and then we say, hope you do well, right? We have to do better than that. We have to have more aftercare supports, and that really includes for birth parents, whether they reunify or not. I keep passing this off, but I have my own.
I could speak on that. Yeah, it's just super important that we're not putting children through, we're not adding more trauma to them. You know, we have to, you know, show them that relationships is important, community is important, and we need to all work together to have the same goal and, you know, to help kids reunify.
So I guess if we were listening to all three of us up here, you know, like bringing it back to relationships and relationship building comes with that support that we just need as families, right? And without Mikala having that foster family around her and supporting her kids, where would she be? I mean, I would hope she's strong enough to do it, but I feel like, you know, having that relationship that was built and supported, I don't know how much the system supported you having that relationship, but that the foster parents are still around for her and her children are, you know, she gets to come back into the system and help, you know, more families out. And I think that's a really important point to make. I think, you know, regardless of who you are within the child protection system, connection with those families and supporting the connections that they already have is crucial. And I just everybody always thinks about the child, which is true, but like a part of that child is the birth family, right? A part of that child is the family. So regardless of if you're trying to save the child during their child protection case plan and you're not really, you know, supporting that parent, that child's probably more likely going to come back and find that mom or dad and see how they are. And just supporting them at the beginning is very helpful so that they can have that relationship and that those parents have had those chances and have built those relationships that help make them successful so that they can have a strong family.
Absolutely. And I just want to add to that, you know, as a social worker, you know, push those relationships, push it, and, you know, talk to both sides. And, you know, how would you like it if we opened it up to more, you know, you guys communicating versus being that one in the middle? You know, you want to, you know, just if I can encourage you to push those relationships so we can continue to support the family as a whole, that's going to be super helpful.
If you want to move into Q&A, we can, or you can say anything. Okay, awesome. So we'll do that. And I see a hand.
Okay. What kind of support would you hope or would you want for child welfare workers to have in order for them to be able to provide the support that you got and you're asking for birth parents and for children and for families?
So, my case happened in Carver County. So I want to say I don't know if everyone does this, but we had safety network meetings where we had everybody come together and we would lay everything out on the table. And we would everyone would have their input. And when it came down to the birth parent, it was, they asked me, what resources do you need? What do we need to do to keep helping you? And they gave me these resources, and the resources just stuck. Like I still attend these groups that I go to, even though my case was closed 2 years ago, and I don't have to do that no more. So it's just really everybody coming together and just putting everything out on the table and just assisting those families and that parent.
Well, I mean, I think training is the first thing that comes to mind, and like Keely, shameless plug for the PAC. I mean, I did the permanency and adaptation competency certificate, and I think that is something that every child welfare worker should be required to do something like that, or other trainings like through the tribal TTCP, help me out, I always get it wrong, but just doing additional training, right? But I think another piece is supervision and CEUs to keep up with best practices, right? Our field is so rapidly changing. I think child welfare is one of the most rapidly changing fields, right? Especially in how we think about permanency and adoption and a lot of changes that we're making toward family preservation, right? So I think one challenge of our profession in the child welfare world is that, I know there's a whole conversation to be had around licensure and gatekeeping and things like that, but a lot of child protection workers are not licensed social workers, right? So there's not an accountability board for some of these things, and there's not always that requirement for CEUs to keep up your license. But I think if we had ongoing supervision and CEUs required of child protection workers specifically around permanency, and including like reflective practice, reflective supervision, I think reflective supervision is really important, because a lot of this is heart work. Like it's kind of that reflective work where we have to say, okay, are you afraid to help build this relationship because of bias? Are you leaning toward what the adoptive parents are saying because X, Y, and Z, right? Are you thinking about the birth parent based in what you are assuming of them or what you know of them, right? Like really helping people to think through what they know to be true and increasing their risk tolerance and their tolerance for being uncomfortable, right? Because it's so easy to say, oh, well, we'll just let the system take care of things, and these are the rules, and we're all going to be separate because that's what feels quote unquote safe. But that's not safe for kids, right? So we have to push ourselves to be uncomfortable and vulnerable and like continually reflect on how we build relationships in the system.
And I think for me, my case was very, very different from Mikala's. So when my kids were entered into foster care, I didn't see them for months. And I didn't have support around my social worker. I always had a very, very late bus card, so anything that I missed was punitive. I went directly from jail into treatment, into sober living, and I kind of did everything that I needed to do in a row without any support. And then when my case closed, everything kind of went away. I was just very fortunate enough to be Indigenous and be a part of the Indigenous community to have those concrete supports that I needed. So, I mean, just somebody that would have said, do you need a ride to go see your kids? Do you need a bus card? How are you doing? You know, like just treat me like a human. Like I'm the person that knows my kids. To involve me in, you know, I shouldn't have to, as birth parents, we shouldn't have to have attorneys fight for us to go to doctor's appointments, to meetings, to have supported the relationship between me and my older daughter. The county really put a divide between us, and that is still affecting our relationship to this day. And I understand that the only reason that my kids were in foster care wasn't because of them, it was because of me. And I had to do the work. But having people help support you make those changes that are there to support you, that's what you should be doing instead of policing, supporting. So I think just the basic things to make somebody feel like a human, to be able to get through their day. Are you okay? What are you upset about? Do you have food? You know, just those things would be super duper helpful for families.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and I know, and then we'll get to lunch. So I see many hands, and I looked at you first. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, I just wanted to say, Miigwech, thank you, all of you, for being vulnerable and willing to share your lived expertise with all of us so that we can learn and do better in this work. And then I also just wanted to touch upon, I know Theresa mentioned permanency, and Mikala, you mentioned timelines, when you shared. And I just wanted to know, if you guys could talk a little bit more about timelines. I know in the child welfare system, we talk about timelines as, from 1 to 18, right? When children, maybe extended foster care to 21, but from 1 to 21 roughly, right? But what about 21 plus? And what about those relationships that we are potentially severing? What about those very real consequences that we are doing for children and young people, and then leaving them to pick up the pieces as adults? Right? What about those connections? And I know, as an Anishinaabe woman, as a mother, my relationship, my love for my daughter doesn't exist on a timeline, right? So I'm just wondering if you guys can talk a little bit more about timelines and how, what you think of them, if they serve a function, if they don't, kind of open, but just wanting to know your thoughts.
From a birth parent perspective, being a part of the system as an adult and as a child that aged out of foster care, I just want to say that as an adult, it didn't take me a year to get to where I was within my addiction, right? It took generations. I'm dealing with historical and intergenerational trauma. So that timeline is awful. And it's a lot of pressure on somebody trying to correct years and years of intergenerational trauma. So that's all I'm going to say.
I agree, because just in my situation, that timeline for me did not work. I needed more time, because when my case closed and those resources started going away, things started going loose. And so that's when, they had to intervene again and come back. And it was just, timelines, there is no time. We gotta come along beside people and help them continue to grow and to continue, and to feel, and
They're arbitrary, right? Because as far as I know, as a licensed social worker, they're not rooted in anything related to child development or anything that we can point to data about for child well-being, right? They're an arbitrary decision for state outcomes that I think are probably related to money, right? And I think that our system sets up the timelines because we can say, oh, well, they've been in out-of-home placement this long, and that's bad for kids. It's like, well, it's because we're pathologizing and not supporting out-of-home placement, right? If we can have a system where this person has this kiddo has an alternative caregiver for we don't know maybe how long, but they still have their primary connections to their parents, and we co-parent and we work together, and we don't pathologize it as this separation. It doesn't, maybe they're living in a different home, but it doesn't have to be a separation if we can keep meaningful relationships, right? And so I think that it's arbitrary. I think we do need to take a good long look at how we think about placement, how it relates to timelines, and what's really incentivizing and informing those timelines. Like, somebody needs to do some data work, right, around like timelines and permanency and child well-being, and maybe that exists and I just don't know about it. But looking at you guys at the front table. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, thank you so much. This is excellent. We all wish we had longer. Thank you so much.